Survives the winter in Frost Valley. Not hope, not faith, not love, but they were wrong. Because one man and his loyal German shepherd stood against the darkness. He was a veteran searching for peace, but what he found instead was a miracle. In a frozen land reborn by faith, their story became a prayer whispered through the snow. The morning sky hung low over the mountains, gray and heavy with snow. The wind carried the scent of pine and cold iron, sweeping through the frozen streets of Frost Valley, a town so small it barely had a heartbeat in winter. Only one building was alive with light, the Northern Lights Diner, its neon sign flickering defiantly against the pale dawn. Inside, Ilara Wilson, 78 and wrapped in a faded wool coat, pushed the door open. Her silver hair was coiled neatly beneath a knitted cap, her blue eyes soft yet sharp with a lifetime of seeing too much. She moved slowly, her hand slightly trembling from both age and the chill, but her gaze remained proud. Every morning, she came here for coffee and quiet, small rituals that kept her loneliness at bay in a world that had grown too silent since her husband's passing. At the far end of the counter, Chloe Vance, the young waitress, wiped down the counter with practiced rhythm. Barely 23, she was tall and slender, her dark curls tied up in a messy bun. Beneath the quick smiles and easy grace, her eyes held the watchfulness of someone who had learned early that danger often came disguised as laughter. Chloe had lived her entire life in Frost Valley. She understood the town's moods, its secrets, its storms, its men who thought power made them gods. When she saw Ilara enter, she smiled warmly. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson. Cold one today?" Ilara nodded, easing herself into her usual booth by the window. Outside, the crunch of boots broke through the stillness. Jim Walker appeared from the white blur of snow, tall and broad-shouldered, his figure built by years of discipline and hard labor. At 52, Jim carried the quiet gravity of a man who had survived both war and its ghosts. His beard was neatly trimmed, flecked with gray, and his eyes, steel blue and steady, scanned his surroundings with the reflex of a soldier who could never quite relax. Beside him trotted Rex, his German shepherd, 8 years old, muscular and alert. The dog's coat shimmered black and tan against the snow, his ears pricked, his movement measured and silent. Together they were a portrait of calm strength, man and dog bound by unspoken understanding. Jim pushed open the diner's door, the bell above it jingling softly. The warmth inside hit him like a wave, fogging his breath. "Morning, Chloe," he greeted, voice low, roughened by the cold. "Morning, Mr. Walker," she replied, her tone respectful but easy. Rex lay down near the door, his gaze sweeping the room, every sound and scent processed in seconds. Jim spotted Ilara and gave a slight nod before taking a seat across from her. They shared a friendship forged in hardship. Last winter he'd found her stranded when her fence collapsed in a storm. He'd repaired it without asking for payment. Since then, they'd shared coffee and quiet conversations about grief, memory, and the strange peace of isolation. "I heard the storm might roll in again tonight," Ilara said, her voice soft but steady. "You fixed that roof of yours yet?" Jim gave a faint smile. "Rex and I did what we could. She leaks less now." She chuckled, the sound like brittle glass. "You talk about that cabin like it's alive." He looked out the frosted window. "Sometimes it feels that way. It creaks when the wind hits, like it's remembering something." He didn't say that the noise reminded him of nights overseas, the hum of helicopters, the weight of silence before gunfire. He never talked about those years, but they lived in his posture, in the way his eyes flicked toward every movement, in the way he sat with his back to the wall. The door slammed open again, and a gust of snow swept in. Cade Jennings stomped through, shaking off his coat. A large man in his 50s, Cade was thick around the middle, his face permanently flushed from drink. His beard was patchy, his eyes small and mean, the kind that enjoyed seeing others flinch. He owned a construction company but mostly spent his time bullying anyone who crossed his employer, Sterlingcroft, a real estate developer trying to buy up Frost Valley's lakeshore. Cade's boots thudded across the diner floor as he threw himself into a booth near the door, two of his men snickering beside him. The air grew colder, despite the heater's hum. Ilara stiffened slightly. Cade had cornered her 2 weeks ago, waving a contract and pretending it was a friendly offer. She had refused, politely but firmly. Since then, he'd made a habit of showing up wherever she was. Subtle intimidation wrapped in small-town casualness. Jim noticed her tension, his eyes narrowing. "You know him?" "I try not to," she murmured, sipping her tea. "He's been trying to buy my land, says it's for development." "More like control," Jim said quietly. Their gazes met, hers filled with quiet defiance, his with protective calm. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, as if echoing the unease rising between them. Chloe glanced from behind the counter, sensing the shift. She discreetly propped her phone against a napkin holder, camera angled toward Cade's booth. She'd seen him harass townsfolk before, but something about this morning felt different. Heavier. Cade noticed Jim's stare and smirked. "Well, look who it is. The hero and his mutt," he sneered. His voice carried through the diner. The laughter of his men followed, hollow and cruel. Jim didn't react. He'd faced worse men in darker places. But his hand brushed the table, steady, calm, a soldier's warning. Ilara tried to ignore Cade, focusing on the steam curling from her cup, but his voice grated like metal. "Heard you still sitting on that lake property, Mrs. Wilson. Shame to waste good land on someone who's just waiting to die." The room fell silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. Ilara's hand trembled, but her voice didn't. "That land is my home," she said. "You can't buy that." Cade's smile vanished, replaced by something meaner. He rose, his bulk blocking the light, and stepped toward her booth. "Everything's for sale up here, lady." Jim's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. "You'll want to sit back down, Cade," he said quietly. Cade turned, eyes full of mockery, until he met Jim's. What he saw there wasn't anger, but cold control. A soldier's stare, unshaken, unflinching. Rex rose too, a low growl rumbling from his chest, the sound primal and clear. Cade hesitated, just long enough for fear to flicker in his eyes. Jim didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence that filled the diner was heavier than any threat. Cade muttered something under his breath and backed away, his men avoiding eye contact as they followed him out into the snow. As the door closed behind them, the tension dissolved. Chloe exhaled shakily, while Ilara touched her cheek, her hand trembling slightly. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Jim nodded once. "Yes, I did." Outside, the snow had thickened, veiling the world in white. Rex nudged Jim's leg, sensing the calm after danger. Jim looked at Ilara and offered a faint smile. "You should let me drive you home. Storm's getting worse." Ilara hesitated, then nodded. As they stepped out together into the falling snow, Frost Valley seemed to hold its breath again. Quiet, waiting, as if it knew that what had begun as a morning of peace was only the first stir of something far larger. The storm outside had thickened by the time Cade Jennings returned. The neon sign of the Northern Lights diner flickered against the whiteout, casting ghostly light over his red, wind-burned face. He stomped through the snowdrift and pushed open the door with a force that made the bell above it jangle violently. His boots were caked with ice, his breath reeking of whiskey. Cade was 54, his heavy-set frame built not from labor, but from years of cheap beer and arrogance. His face, rough and unshaven, carried the look of a man who mistook fear for respect. He had been a construction foreman once, fired after a fight left a man in the hospital. And that disgrace still fed the anger simmering behind his pale, calculating eyes. Inside, the diner was quieter than usual, filled with the smell of coffee and the faint hum of the heater struggling against the cold. Ilara Wilson sat in her corner booth, knitting a wool scarf, her tea untouched. Jim Walker was at the counter, reading the local paper, his back straight, posture relaxed but alert. Beside his stool, Rex lay stretched out, eyes half-closed yet watchful, his black and tan coat glinting under the yellow diner light. Chloe Vance moved behind the counter, her hand steady, though her eyes darted toward the door the moment Cade entered. She had seen that kind of swagger before, the kind that came before trouble. Cade's eyes found Ilara immediately. His grin was thin, sharp, and hungry. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice oily with mock politeness. He slid into the booth opposite her without invitation, his elbows spreading wide on the table like he owned it. "You got my message, right? About that property by Lake Serenity?" Ilara didn't look up. "I received it," she said calmly, "and my answer hasn't changed." Cade's grin faltered, then darkened. Around them, the few customers pretended to be engrossed in their meals. Only Jim's eyes lifted slightly from the newspaper, the soldier in him already sensing the shift in air pressure before a storm. Sterling Croft's name had a way of freezing any conversation in Frost Valley. The man himself rarely appeared, but his money seeped through every corner of the town, from the mayor's office to the sheriff's patrol car. Sterling Croft, 48, was an urban developer with slicked back hair, manicured hands, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He had built resorts in Nevada and Montana, leaving behind trails of debt and destruction. Cade was his enforcer, his local fixer. When polite letters failed, Cade brought persuasion of a more physical kind. And now, with Ilara's property blocking Croft's planned luxury resort, Cade had returned to finish the job, by fear, if not by words. "You think you can say no forever?" Cade asked, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Croft doesn't take kindly to people wasting his time. This town's changing, lady. You can sell now and walk. Away rich or—" He let the threat hang. Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she folded her knitting, but her voice stayed even. "That land was my husband's dream. It's not for sale." Her calm infuriated Cade. There was nothing he hated more than dignity he couldn't break. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling her teacup. "Your husband's gone. You're just an old woman sitting on land that should belong to real men." Chloe froze, one hand gripping the counter. She reached under for her phone, pretending to adjust napkins, and started recording. Liam Webb, the young travel vlogger from the previous morning, was back outside, setting up his camera for another Winter Morning in Alaska video. Through the window, he noticed the commotion, lens refocusing instinctively. Inside, Cade's voice rose. "You think your fancy soldier friend's gonna save you? He ain't here to play hero every time?" His words drew glances. People knew who he meant. Jim's paper folded with a slow, deliberate motion. Jim stood up and turned. The motion was quiet but carried authority, the kind born of years in command. His voice was level, almost casual. "Cade, leave her be." Cade spun around, sneering. "Well, look who thinks he's sheriff now. Go back to your dog, soldier boy." Jim's expression didn't change. Last warning. Cade barked a laugh and stepped closer. Or what? You gonna sick that mud on me? The tension was thick enough to choke on. Rex stood, muscles rippling under his coat, his gaze locked on Cade. A low growl vibrated through the diner's silence, not loud, but deep enough to make every hair rise. Cade's two lackeys, rough-looking men in their 30s with wind-chapped faces and nervous eyes, exchanged glances. One muttered, "Maybe we should go, boss." Cade ignored him. His pride wouldn't allow retreat, not in front of witnesses. "Sit your dog down before I—" His words were cut short when Ilara rose, her voice trembling but resolute. "That's enough, Mr. Jennings. You've said your piece. Please leave." For a second, Cade just stared, the flush in his cheeks deepening into something darker. The silence pressed in, and then, suddenly, violently, he raised his hand and struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the diner like breaking glass. Ilara fell back against the booth, her hand to her cheek, eyes wide in shock. Chloe gasped, dropping the glass she'd been holding. It shattered at her feet. Liam's camera caught everything from outside, the slap, the stunned faces, Rex lunging forward. Before Cade could move again, Jim was between them. He didn't shout. He simply moved, a swift, controlled step forward, one hand pushing Cade's chest just enough to make the larger man stumble. Rex stood in front of Ilara, teeth bared but unmoving, waiting for a command. Cade froze, breath heavy, whiskey fumes mixing with sweat. "What the hell?" Cade started, but Jim's voice cut him off, quiet and sharp as ice. "Touch her again, and you'll lose that hand." There was no bravado, just truth, the kind of warning that didn't need volume to be heard. Cade's men shifted uneasily, eyes darting towards the door. Outside, Liam lowered his camera for a moment, stunned. Inside, Chloe whispered, "I called the sheriff." The mention of Sheriff Brody Kent made Cade smirk again, confidence slithering back into his expression. "Good. My friend Kent will clear this right up." He grabbed his coat and stalked out, muttering curses, his lackeys close behind. The bell rang sharply as the door slammed behind them. Jim turned to Ilara. "You all right?" His voice softened, concern replacing the steel. Ilara nodded shakily, tears unshed in her eyes. "I'm fine, just startled." Chloe hurried over with a wet cloth, anger and guilt swirling in her expression. "I should have stopped him," she murmured. Jim shook his head. "You did right. You got proof." Outside, snow whipped harder against the windows. The camera across the street still blinked red, still recording. Jim helped Ilara sit back down, then turned to look out the window, jaw tight. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Rex settled beside him, head resting on his boot, eyes still fixed on the door. That night, long after the diner lights had gone out, the storm howled through Frost Valley like a living thing. In a dark corner of town, Cade sat in his truck, knuckles white around a flask, replaying the humiliation in his head. His pride burned hotter than the whiskey in his gut. He thought of Croft's voice over the phone earlier. Handle it. Make it disappear. Cade looked out at the endless snow, rage twisting his features. "You'll regret this, Walker," he muttered to himself. And in the darkness, the line between fear and fury began to blur, the kind that only ends one way in a town that keeps its sins buried beneath the ice. The diner lights hummed softly, reflecting off the chrome and glass, while silence wrapped around the room like frost. Jim Walker stood from his booth, his movements slow and deliberate, the kind of calm that only men forged by war could master. His steel blue eyes hardened under the neon lights, sharp and cold like a blade drawn in the dark. Rex, the 8-year-old German shepherd, rose beside him, his muscles taut under his thick black and tan coat, a low growl vibrating through the floor. Across the room, Cade Jennings froze mid-step, the color draining from his ruddy cheeks. For a man used to intimidation, the quiet resolve in Jim's stare was far more dangerous than shouting. Every customer in the diner knew it. A storm was about to break. "Where I come from," Jim said, his voice deep and steady, "men don't hit women, especially not in front of a soldier." The words landed heavy in the smoky air. Cade clenched his fists, jaw tight, a vein throbbing at his temple. The flickering neon light made his expression seem monstrous, torn between fear and rage. For a long heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Jim tilted his head slightly, his tone shifting from calm to command. "Rex, watch." At once, Rex lowered his body, paws firm, eyes locked on Cade. His silent warning filled the space between them, a living wall of disciplined violence. Cade's bravado faltered. His boots shuffled backward half an inch, a tremor betraying the first crack in his confidence. The diner's door swung open again, and with it came the biting cold. Sheriff Brody Kent stepped in, the sharp creak of his boots cutting through the stillness. Kent was a man in his late 50s, built like the town itself, weathered, stiff, and gray with rot. His face was broad but soft, his chin covered in uneven stubble, his eyes small and calculating beneath the brim of his hat. He wore his tan uniform like a second skin, though the badge on his chest had lost its shine long ago. A long scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, a souvenir, rumor said, from a bar fight years back. Kent smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Now, what's all this?" he drawled lazily. "Can't even have a peaceful morning without someone crying wolf." Cade visibly relaxed at the sight of the sheriff, smirking as if his guardian angel had arrived. "Glad you're here, Kent," he said loudly, his voice dripping with false indignation. "This old lady here started it. Got these folks all riled up." Ilara's lips parted, disbelief washing over her pale face. Ilara Wilson, though shaken, straightened her back, the red mark on her cheek still visible under the diner's glow. "That man hit me," she said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. Kent turned his head toward her with feigned sympathy, then shrugged. "Well now, Mrs. Wilson, accidents happen. I'm sure he didn't mean—" Jim's voice sliced through his sentence like a blade. "You call that an accident?" He took one step forward, the air tightening. Rex's growl deepened, quiet but unmistakable. Sheriff Kent raised a hand, his tone sharpening. "That's enough, Walker. Stand down. You're not in the Marines anymore. You don't give orders here." Jim stopped mid-stride, his gaze locking on Kent's. There was no anger in it, just clarity, a soldier's ability to measure a man's worth in an instant. What he saw in the sheriff was corruption, weakness wrapped in a uniform. "Maybe not," Jim said slowly, "but I still know right from wrong." For a brief second, something flickered across Kent's face, a mix of irritation and unease. He turned away, breaking eye contact. Cade, emboldened, grinned like a man back in control. "See that?" he said. "Even the law knows when to stay out of my way." "Law," Jim repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "You think that badge means law?" His tone carried something deeper now. Disappointment. "Where I come from, a badge meant you protect the weak. Out here, it just means you protect each other." The quiet words carried more weight than shouting ever could. Chloe Vance, standing behind the counter, felt tears sting her eyes. Her phone was still recording, the tiny red dot blinking unnoticed on the counter. Outside, the storm howled, snow swirling against the diner windows like restless ghosts. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Cade's smirk wavered again, and for the first time, Sheriff Kent shifted uncomfortably under his own authority. The bell above the door jingled softly again, and a gust of wind swept through as Liam Webb, the young vlogger, burst in. He was 27, slim, and slightly awkward, with blonde hair poking out from under a knit beanie and a camera still slung around his neck. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, his breath fogging as he spoke. I got it all on film, he stammered, pointing toward Cade. Everything! You hit her! I saw it! The room erupted into murmurs. Cade's expression twisted into rage. You little punk, he spat, stepping toward Liam. Jim's arm shot out, blocking him before he could take another step. Not this time, Jim said, eyes hard as granite. Rex growled once, deep and final. Cade froze mid-motion. Sheriff Kent barked, Enough! His voice cracked like thunder, but his authority had already melted away. The diner's customers were standing now, some whispering, others recording with their phones. Kent adjusted his belt, forcing composure back into his posture. All right, everyone calm down, he said, his drawl thinner now. We'll handle this properly. Cade, go home. I'll file a report later. Jim's jaw clenched. You're letting him walk after assaulting an old woman? Kent's lips curled. You want to spend the night in lockup, soldier? Keep pushing. The insult hung there. Jim didn't move. But his silence spoke louder than any defiance. Cade laughed, shoving past Kent towards the door. You're finished, old man, he muttered at Jim before disappearing into the storm. When the door slammed shut, the tension finally broke. Chloe exhaled shakily, setting her phone down. Liam looked between Jim and the sheriff, disbelief and fear mingling on his young face. Ilara sat quietly, her hand still pressed to her cheek, eyes filled not with fear but sorrow. Sorrow for a town that had forgotten what justice meant. Jim crouched beside Rex, his hand resting lightly on the dog's neck, grounding himself. We're done here, he said softly to Ilara. I'll take you home. Kent stepped forward, blocking the way. You stay out of this, Walker. That's a warning. Jim straightened, towering over him. You've had your chance to do the right thing. Next time I won't wait. Kent's face tightened, but he stepped aside. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling across the empty street. Jim guided Ilara to his truck, the snow crunching under their boots. Rex trotted close, alert, his fur dusted white. As the headlights cut through the blizzard, Ilara looked out the window, voice faint. You shouldn't have crossed them, Jim. They'll come after you. He glanced at her, a small smile on his lips. They already were. I just made it official. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, the storm swallowing sound and light. Behind them, the Northern Lights diner stood silent, its flickering sign reflected in the snow, a witness to a battle that was only just beginning. The storm hadn't stopped when the video went live. By dawn, the clip titled "Bully Slaps Elderly Woman," confronted by veteran and his dog, had reached every corner of America. The footage, shot by Chloe Vance and Liam Webb, showed Cade Jennings striking Ilara and Jim Walker stepping in with the quiet authority of a soldier. Comment sections exploded with outrage. News anchors replayed the video with slow-motion analysis, highlighting Jim's steady hand and Rex's poised stance like symbols of decency amid decay. Outside Frost Valley, it looked like heroism. Inside, it looked like rebellion. At the mayor's office, a dimly lit room smelled of burnt coffee and stale air. Mayor Harold Thorne stared at his laptop, sweat beading beneath his combed-back gray hair. He was in his 60s, tall but slouched, a man once charismatic, now hollowed by years of compromise. His pale fingers tapped nervously on the mahogany desk. "That video can't stay up," he muttered. Across from him, Sheriff Brody Kent leaned back, feigning calm, though the vein on his neck twitched. "It's already gone viral, Harold. Deleting it won't help." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Then make it disappear another way. The land deal can't fall apart over one goddamn diner fight." The land deal. That was the true rot. Behind the facade of small-town peace, Thorne, Kent, and local contractor Everett Croft had been conspiring to seize old properties on the valley's edge under eminent domain. Croft, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a bristled beard and hard eyes, stood by the window, his voice rough from years of construction dust and whiskey. "If that video keeps spreading, the state'll start sniffing around. And I'm not losing millions because some waitress hit record." His hand clenched into a fist. Kent's smirk flickered. "Then maybe we should remind her what happens to people who talk too much." That afternoon, the Northern Lights diner was empty, except for Chloe. She stood behind the counter, arms crossed, eyes red from crying. The closed sign hung crooked on the door. A newspaper headline glared from the counter. "Hero Veteran Defends Woman. Frost Valley Diner Incident Sparks National Debate." The door opened, and the owner, Mr. Davison, a thin man in his 50s with oil-stained hands, stepped inside. "Chloe," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes, "I'm sorry. They called me this morning. You're let go." Her heart dropped. "Who?" "The sheriff's office. Said it's for your safety." But they both knew what it really meant. She packed her things in silence. Up in the forested ridge north of town, Liam Webb returned to his cabin, snow whipping across the roof. His small home was a cozy mess: camera gear, cables, and a half-written script about small-town America. He was editing the second upload, this time including Sheriff Kent's dismissive remarks. His hands shook from adrenaline. "They'll have to face it now," he whispered. But when he stepped outside to bring in firewood, his gut tightened. Fresh tire tracks curved up his driveway, too wide for a regular car. When he came back in, the window was ajar. His computer screen flickered, then went black. That night, Frost Valley's streets were ghostly, buried in fresh snow. Jim Walker stood outside his cabin, staring at the faint glow of town lights below. Rex sat beside him, ears twitching at every sound. Jim could sense something moving, not the wind, but the way danger carries silence before it strikes. His phone buzzed, a message from Chloe. "They fired me. Liam's missing. Be careful." Jim's jaw tightened. "They're cleaning up," he said quietly. Rex whined softly, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Jim rubbed his head. "Not this time, boy. Not without a fight." Meanwhile, in Croft's office above the lumber yard, plans were drawn on a map pinned to the wall. Croft leaned over, tapping a red circle marking Liam's property. "This area's ours once we get him out of the picture. Sheriff handles the rest." Kent lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke through his nose. "You better pray that soldier doesn't start digging. He's got that look, the kind that doesn't stop." Croft grinned. "Then we give him something else to worry about." Outside, headlights swept across the yard. 2 trucks idling in the snow, men inside wearing dark coats and no names. The next morning, Chloe sat by her window, watching snowflakes drift like ashes. Her apartment was small, barely heated, filled with the soft hum of her phone. Notifications kept pouring in, strangers thanking her, offering money, calling her a hero. But beneath the praise came threats, unknown numbers, anonymous messages. "Keep quiet if you know what's good for you." She flinched at every vibration, When a knock sounded on her door, she froze. A pause, then a voice. "Miss Vance, it's Jim Walker." Relief flooded her chest. She opened the door to see Jim, snow-dusted and solemn, Rex beside him, watchful as ever. Jim stepped inside, removing his gloves. "I saw the news. They're targeting everyone involved. You need to stay somewhere safe." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to cause all this, Mr. Walker. I just couldn't watch him hit her." Jim's expression softened. "You did the right thing. Sometimes that's all it takes to start a war." Rex sniffed the air, then turned toward the door, ears raised. Jim followed his gaze, a black SUV slowing down across the street. "They found you," he said. "Pack what you can." Without another word, Chloe grabbed her coat as Jim moved to the window, eyes cold and focused. Outside, the SUV idled, engine rumbling like distant thunder. Two men sat inside, strangers to town, faces hard, dressed in plain black parkas. One of them, tall with a scar over his eyebrow, checked his phone. "Targets are the waitress and the vet," he muttered. "Orders from Kent." They watched as the cabin lights flicked off. "He's moving her," the other said. "We follow." The vehicle rolled forward slowly, blending into the snowfall, unaware that Rex was already outside, tracking their scent with military precision. Jim's truck cut through the icy road, headlights slicing the dark. Chloe sat in silence, her hands trembling in her lap. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere they won't look, the old ranger station near the ridge," Jim said. Behind them, the SUV's lights reappeared, faint but persistent. Rex growled low, sensing pursuit. Jim's grip tightened on the wheel. "They want a fight. They just picked the wrong soldier." The storm thickened, swallowing everything in white, and beneath the howl of wind and vengeance, Frost Valley's fragile peace shattered once more. The snow fell like whispers of ash over Frost Valley, smothering sound, swallowing light. Jim Walker drove through the empty streets, headlights cutting thin tunnels through the blizzard. The call had come only 10 minutes earlier. A trembling voice from a blocked number. "Mr. Walker, this is Evelyn Thorne. I need to meet you. Tonight. St. Jude's Chapel by the Pine Ridge. Please." He recognized the name immediately. The mayor's wife. Now, as his truck climbed the winding forest road, Jim's instincts screamed caution. Beside him, Rex sat rigid, the dog's breath fogging the window, ears flicking with every groan of the wind. Somewhere deep in his gut, Jim knew this night would change everything. St. Jude's appeared through the curtain of snow like a ghostly relic. The small chapel, built of dark stone and pine beams, stood alone among the trees, its stained glass windows glowing faintly from within. The cross atop the steeple leaned slightly, battered by decades of storms. Jim parked the truck beside the old cemetery wall, engine idling low. He adjusted his coat, checked the pistol holstered at his belt. Habit, not threat. "Stay close," he murmured. Rex leapt out, paws sinking into snow, eyes scanning the tree line. Together they approached the chapel door, the faint light of a single candle flickering behind the frosted glass. Inside, the air was heavy with wax and cold stone. Evelyn Thorne sat in the front pew, her silhouette framed by candlelight. She was in her late 50s, tall and slender, her once elegant posture weighed down by guilt. Her silver-blonde hair was tied back, strands falling loosely around a pale, tired face. Her fur-lined coat hung open, revealing trembling hands clutching a small silver cross. When she turned toward him, her blue eyes were rimmed with red. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Walker," she whispered. "I didn't know who else to call." Jim removed his gloves, his expression unreadable. You said you had proof. Evelyn nodded, opening a small velvet clutch. Inside was a black USB drive, wrapped in a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Jim with shaking fingers. That contains recordings, bank transfers, emails, everything my husband and Croft have done. They've laundered money through the land deals for years. Sheriff Kent helped cover it up. Her voice cracked on the last words. If they find out I talked to you. She trailed off, tears glimmering on her lashes. Jim took the drive, his hand steady. You did the right thing, ma'am. The truth's never easy, but it's the only way out. He pocketed the evidence carefully, scanning the shadows behind her. The chapel creaked as the wind howled outside. Candles flickered wildly, their light dancing across carved angels on the altar. Evelyn drew a deep breath, voice lowering to a tremor. You must promise me something, Mr. Walker. If anything happens to me, make sure this reaches the news. I don't care about me anymore. Just stop them. Jim nodded solemnly. You have my word. For a moment, the storm seemed to hush, but Rex's ears twitched. Then came a distant crunch outside, footsteps in the snow, slow, deliberate. Jim's eyes darted to the door. Someone's here. He moved silently to the window, peering through the frost. Two dark figures approached through the snow, flashlights cutting through the blizzard. They weren't police, no badges, no hesitation. Hired men. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other leaner with a limp. Their faces were shadowed by hoods. Jim's pulse slowed, years of instinct taking over. We've been followed, he said quietly. Evelyn's breath hitched. No, Harold wouldn't. Her voice broke as realization struck. He knows. Jim motioned for her to stay low. He extinguished the nearest candles, plunging half the chapel into darkness. The wooden door rattled once, then again, harder. Mrs. Thorne, a muffled voice called through the wind, smooth but chilling. Mayor wants you home. The doorknob turned, but Jim was already moving. He drew his weapon and signaled Rex with a soft hand gesture. The German shepherd lowered his body, ready. The first intruder shoved the door open, stepping into the dim light, a bearded man in his 30s with a black parka and scarred cheek. The second followed, aiming a flashlight down the aisle. What the hell? He muttered, just as Rex lunged from the shadows, knocking him off balance. The first man raised his gun, but Jim fired once, a clean, controlled shot. The weapon clattered from his grasp. Chaos erupted in the chapel. The wounded man stumbled, clutching his arm, while Rex pinned the second to the ground, growling deep. Don't, Jim ordered sharply, keeping his gun trained. You're not here for her safety. The first man sneered through the pain. You don't know what you're in the middle of, old man. Jim's voice was ice. You'd be surprised. Evelyn stood trembling behind the pew, her face pale under the candlelight. Please, she said. No more blood. Jim hesitated, then kicked their weapons aside. Get her out, he told Rex. The dog released the man reluctantly, standing guard near Evelyn as Jim backed towards the door. They stepped into the storm once more, snow pelting their faces. Evelyn clutched her coat around her, eyes wide with fear and grief. What will you do now? She asked over the wind. Jim glanced toward his truck. Get this to someone who can use it. Behind them, the chapel door creaked open again, the two gunmen retreating into the night. Evelyn turned once to look back at the flickering candlelight within St. Jude's, whispering, God forgive us. Jim opened the passenger door for her. You've done your part. Now it's mine. Rex jumped into the truck bed, scanning the forest with alert eyes. As the truck rumbled down the snowy road, Evelyn sat silently, clutching the silver cross to her chest. Jim drove with steady focus, the USB drive glinting faintly in the dashboard light. "There's a reporter I know in Anchorage," he said. "He'll get this out." Evelyn nodded weakly, exhaustion overtaking her. "They'll come after you too," she murmured. Jim's jaw set. "Let them." The wind howled through the trees, but inside the cab, a strange calm settled. Frost Valley was still buried under lies, but now, for the first time, truth had a pulse, and Jim Walker was holding it in his hand. The dawn broke pale and soundless over Frost Valley. Jim Walker stood inside his cabin, snow piled high against the windows, the fire crackling faintly in the hearth. On the table lay the USB drive Evelyn Thorne had given him, now connected to his laptop. Rows of files opened, audio recordings, wire transfers, scanned contracts stamped with signatures of power. Names and numbers scrolled past his eyes, each one a nail in the coffin of corruption. Rex lay near the door, his ears twitching as the wind moaned outside. Jim's face was lit by the cold blue glow of the screen, every scar and line sharpened by the weight of what he was about to unleash. He picked up his satellite phone, the one he hadn't used in years. The signal flickered but held steady enough to reach a secure line. "NCIS Anchorage, this is Special Agent Caldwell," a calm voice answered. "Identify yourself." Jim spoke with quiet precision. "Name's Jim Walker, former Marine. I have evidence tied to municipal corruption, money laundering, and interstate fraud involving Frost Valley officials. Sending files now." He hit upload. Silence followed. Then the agent's voice returned, colder, more alert. "Understood, Mr. Walker. Stay put. We're mobilizing a task force." Jim ended the call, staring out through the fogged glass at the endless white expanse. "It's begun," he murmured. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift. By sunrise, 2 black SUVs rolled silently through the icy road toward town. Inside the lead vehicle, Special Agent Laura Caldwell, mid-30s, sat with a tablet in hand. Her short, auburn hair framed a sharp, freckled face. Her gray eyes were steady with focus. Caldwell was a woman forged by order and loss. Her brother had died in uniform 10 years prior, and she had vowed never to let a system rot from within again. Dressed in a dark parka and tactical vest, she checked her watch. "Teams 1 and 2 are in position," she said. Beside her, Agent Mark Rivas, a tall man in his 40s with a shaved head and neatly trimmed beard, adjusted his earpiece. "Targets confirmed. Let's clean this town." Back in Frost Valley, Sheriff Brody Kent woke to the distant hum of engines. He rubbed the sleep from his bloodshot eyes, the hangover dulling his instincts. The radio on his desk crackled, static and voices overlapping. "Sheriff Kent, this is dispatch." Then the door burst open. 2 agents stormed in, snow swirling behind them. "Brody Kent," Caldwell's voice rang out. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction, and aiding organized crime." Kent froze, half standing, his face hardened, jaw working beneath uneven stubble. "You got no right." But the cold metal of handcuffs silenced him. As they let him out into the blinding snow, townsfolk peeked from doorways. The badge he once used as armor now gleamed like shame against his chest. At the same moment, across town, chaos erupted inside the mayor's residence. Evelyn Thorne sat at her piano, hands trembling over the keys. The melody faltered when she heard the crash upstairs, glass breaking, footsteps rushing. "Harold," she called softly. But the answer came as a gunshot. She ran toward the sound, tears freezing on her cheeks. Mayor Harold Thorne was slumped over his desk, the revolver still smoking in his hand, papers scattered like dying birds. On the window behind him, the sunrise cast a faint orange glow over the frost, painting the room in tragic calm. Evelyn fell to her knees, whispering, "God forgive him." Outside, sirens wailed through the valley. At Anchorage International Airport, Everett Croft thought he had escaped. He strode briskly through the private terminal, beard crusted with snow, heavy coat collar turned up. His eyes darted between security gates. A pilot waited beside a sleek jet, engines humming low. Croft's confidence returned as he clutched his passport and forged documents. But before he reached the stairs, 5 men surrounded him. "Everett Croft," Agent Rivas announced, his breath misting in the cold. "You're done." Croft spun, eyes wild, reaching inside his coat. A moment later, he was face down on the tarmac, arms pinned behind his back, snow melting under the heat of adrenaline and fear. Jim watched it all unfold on his laptop, live-streamed from news channels and agency feeds. "Operation Clean Slate executed in Frost Valley," the headlines blared. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. Rex sat at his feet, resting his head on Jim's boot. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, scattering gold across the snowdrifts. Jim whispered, "We did it, buddy." But his gaze lingered on the horizon, where silence stretched, the kind that follows justice, heavy and absolute. Later that afternoon, Agent Caldwell arrived at Jim's cabin. She stepped out of her SUV, boots crunching on ice, and approached him with a firm handshake. "Mr. Walker, you just took down half a county's worth of corruption." Jim nodded, quiet as always. "Wasn't for me, was for them, the ones who still believed in the badge." Caldwell studied him a moment, seeing both soldier and survivor. "You ever think of coming back?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "I already did." As night fell, Frost Valley glowed with a strange peace. The diner reopened its doors. Chloe Vance returned behind the counter, pouring hot coffee for locals who spoke in hushed tones about what had happened. Liam Webb's new video, "The Veteran Who Saved Frost Valley," reached millions. Evelyn Thorne left town quietly, boarding a bus bound north, her silver hair catching the light of dawn. Somewhere above the ridge, the chapel bells of St. Jude's tolled softly, echoing over fields of untouched snow. Jim stood on his porch once more, watching the sunset stain the white landscape crimson and gold. Rex sat beside him, tail thumping slowly. The world was still, but inside that stillness was the hum of rebirth, the sound of a town remembering what truth felt like. Jim took a long breath, exhaling steam into the frozen air. "It's over," he said. Rex gave a low, content rumble. Yet both of them knew. Peace was never permanent, only earned. The harsh winter finally loosened its grip on Frost Valley. Snowmelt ran in silver veins through the streets, and roofs dripped steadily as sunlight returned to the land. The once silent town now hummed with the low rhythm of rebuilding. Jim Walker stood outside the Northern Lights diner, the same place where everything had begun. The fresh paint gleamed pale yellow beneath the morning sun. Inside, laughter and the clatter of cups replaced the tension that had haunted those walls. Rex lay by the porch, soaking up the weak warmth, his black and tan fur glistening. For the first time in months, Jim's shoulders eased. The ghosts had quieted, replaced by the steady pulse of life reclaiming what was lost. A new face had arrived with the thaw. Anya Sharma, the state-appointed recovery manager, stepped from a government SUV, clipboard in hand, her boots crunching on slush. She was in her early 30s, medium height, with warm brown skin, dark eyes sharp with purpose, and long black hair tied neatly beneath a wool beret. Her calm authority carried a mix of discipline and empathy. She had seen broken towns before, mining sites abandoned, coastal villages after floods, but Frost Valley had something different, a heartbeat. "Mr. Walker," she said, offering a firm handshake, "I read the report. I'm here to help put it all back together." Jim smiled faintly. "Then you came to the right place." Inside the diner, Chloe Vance moved confidently behind the counter, not as a waitress anymore, but as the new manager. Her brown hair was now shorter, brushing her shoulders, and her eyes carried quiet determination. The locals filled every booth, workers, families, even a few new faces brought in for reconstruction. On the wall, a small framed photo showed Jim, Rex, and Chloe, taken the day the diner reopened. "Coffee on the house?" Chloe called out with a grin. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about starting over. Jim nodded at her from his booth, pride flickering behind his calm demeanor. That afternoon, Anya held a meeting in the old town hall. The wooden floors creaked, and dust motes danced in the shafts of light. "We'll restore Frost Valley in 3 phases: housing, infrastructure, and employment," she explained, her voice carrying over the murmurs. Jim stood in the back beside Ilara Wilson, who looked stronger now. Ilara, with her silver hair neatly pinned, wore a thick maroon coat and carried herself with quiet dignity. Her bruises had healed, and so had her spirit. "It's good to see people smiling again," she whispered. Jim nodded, arms folded. "Sometimes it takes a storm to remind us how much light we had." Days passed, and the sound of hammers replaced the echo of sirens. Cade Jennings returned one morning, thinner, eyes hollow but clear. He walked slowly up Main Street, his boots splashing through puddles of melting snow. When people saw him, conversations froze. Cade stopped in front of the diner, his breath visible in the crisp air. "I came to fix what I broke," he said quietly. Chloe stepped out, wary but calm. "Talk's cheap, Cade," he nodded. "Then I'll work for free." The crowd watched as he rolled up his sleeves, picking up a hammer from the repair crew. The first strike echoed, a small sound, but one that carried redemption. Under Anya's coordination, the town transformed. Fresh paint spread across old storefronts, broken signs replaced, and laughter echoed through reopened doors. Even the sheriff's office, now under federal supervision, became a symbol of renewal. Children played in the streets again, throwing snowballs at Rex, who barked joyfully and chased them in circles. Jim stood nearby with Anya, watching. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. Jim shook his head. "Not anymore. This place, it's got roots now." Anya smiled, eyes reflecting the sunlight glinting off melting ice. "Maybe so. Maybe it needed someone like you to plant them." One evening, Chloe hosted a small gathering at the diner. The tables were full, workers, families, even Agent Caldwell and Agent Rivas, who returned to ensure the town's safety before leaving for Anchorage. Caldwell, in civilian clothes for once, smiled faintly as she sipped her coffee. "Didn't think I'd see this place so alive," she said. Jim raised his cup toward her. "You helped make it happen." Rex lay near the heater, snoring softly. The jukebox hummed an old country tune, and for a fleeting moment, Frost Valley felt like the heart of the world. Simple, good, and whole. As spring deepened, the valley came alive with color. Patches of green pushed through the snowbanks, and the frozen lake began to thaw, reflecting streaks of pink and gold at sunset. Ilara tended to a small garden outside her cottage, her late husband's gloves hanging on the fence. Cade worked silently nearby, repairing roofs, his hands blistered but steady. Every swing of his hammer was both penance and prayer. Across the street, children planted new trees under Anya's supervision, their laughter mixing with bird song. Life was returning, fragile but unstoppable. That evening, Jim sat on the cabin's wooden steps overlooking the thawing lake. The sky burned red and orange, as if the horizon itself was exhaling warmth after a long freeze. Rex lay beside him, fur ruffled by the cold wind, eyes half closed in contentment. Jim watched the water ripple, for the first time in years, not from fear, but from peace. He thought of the faces he'd met, the broken, the brave, the ones who stayed. "We made it, buddy," he said softly. Rex's tail thumped once, a steady heartbeat against the wood. When the wind stilled, the air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth, the scent of rebirth. In the distance, church bells rang from St. Jude's Chapel, no longer a place of fear, but of remembrance. Jim closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. The scars of Frost Valley would never disappear, but neither would its strength. The ice had melted, and beneath it, hope bloomed. Jim whispered a quiet prayer, not for himself, but for the town that had taught him what redemption looked like in the cold. Sometimes God doesn't perform miracles through thunder or lightning. Sometimes He sends them quietly, through the people who still choose kindness, even when the world grows cold. Frost Valley wasn't just a town buried in snow. It was a place where broken hearts found warmth again, where forgiveness proved stronger than fear, and where faith turned winter into spring. If you're hearing this now, maybe it's a sign that no matter how long your winter feels, God's light is waiting for you just beyond the storm. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little faith tonight. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless every soul watching, wherever you are, whatever season you're in.